It's not just the police and security services who think anyone and everyone is either up for sale or ripe to be blackmailed. My experience of recent years is that almost everyone has an agenda, especially in public life. I was in the national news for a few days just before the 2015 general election, which surprised a lot of people when it delivered a Conservative majority. Well, I'm sure the Tories won't be particularly helpful to me, but their majority was one MP less thanks to Tommy Robbinson. The nation ought to be grateful, though. Unusually for once, it wasn't a case of the world slagging me off in their news. In fact, there was almost an uncomfortable silence from all of the usual media suspects, because for once I was portrayed as a bloke doing the right thing, exposing corruption. I don't think some people knew how to handle that. It contradicted all their cosy preconceptions about who and what the supposedly far-right Tommy Robbinson is. If there are themes that emerge from writing this book, I expect one will be that you can trust hardly anyone. I certainly can't. When I quit the EDL, I got a lot of support from Quilliam Foundation, an anti-extreme think tank. As part of the process of leaving the EDL and trying to find a constructive way of being involved with the national debate, I met a lot of people who were presented as being progressive Muslims. One such man was Afzal Amin, the Conservative candidate for Dudley North. In the general election, I liked Afzal. He talked sense. He'd been a captain in the British Army who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even been a counter-insurgency education officer to Prince William and Prince Harry. We met a few times, and he was a kind of straight-talking British Muslim. You'd like to think we need a few more of in public life. A few more, a few thousand more. That's what I thought at first. He talked to me about arranging a dinner with a group of serving Muslim soldiers, but it never happened. Afzal kept in touch though. He texted me at Christmas, and then in January 2015 he called to say he was coming back from London and could he drop in to say hello. I wasn't exactly busy, so I said yes. The EDL were planning yet another protest at Dudley, in his seat, over the building of another of those monstrosity that the local council and residents had been battling over for the past 7 years and had been finally given the green light. The EDL had protested there several times. Afzal told me at first that he wanted to talk to the EDL leadership in the area before their protest at the beginning of February, and could I introduce them to him, since I left the group. The new chairman and some of the leading figures were from the Midlands anyway, so I said yes. Afzal was pretty scathing about the mosque plans. He said he'd told the Dudley Muslim Association that if they had 5 million in the bank, the plans had been scaled down a lot, they shouldn't be spending on a lavish mosque, but on their youth, tackling crime and drugs and all other issues in the streets. He said the mosque plans was little more than a big dick contest for architects. As I'd thought ever since first meeting him, he seemed to be talking sense. Since leaving the EDL and being sent down, I hadn't spoken to anyone associated with the group, but I called the chairman, Steve Eddowes. I also rang my contact, Dev, who runs an anti-extreme organisation. Dev has become something of a mentor to me, and although we don't always see eye to eye, he always said his two aims were to try to keep me safe and to keep the public safe. The fact that I am still here and have spoken at places like Oxford Union and Harrow shows he's been at least partially successful. Dev was from that area, so I told him that I was coming up and asked if he wouldn't mind sitting in, given what Afzal said later, when he claimed that the story which blew up nationally was all an EDL plot. I'm glad that I did. When I left the EDL, Steve Eddowes was one of the blokes I was close to. He understood the need to keep the right-wing nutters away. We'd always been clear about that. Not that anyone in the mainstream media or politics wanted to listen. I still have a lot of time for Eddowes. I picked Dev up and we went to meet at the Toby Carvery, which was funny in itself, as an entire corner of the restaurant was like a shrine to Winston Churchill. I thought that was great. Churchill's watching. over these lads. I was taking photos of all on my mobile phone. In fact, I'd only been there about 10 minutes when my wife rang saying there'd been 2 cars parked outside the house, men with hoods on, in the dark. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and one had just got something out of the boot and passed it through the window to another man. We don't live in the kind of street where you would expect strangers in cars just to randomly pull up outside. I screamed at her to hit the panic button and told the others that I had to go. I was out of there and on the phone to the police before the others got down to discussing anything about whatever Afzal's plans were. You probably can't imagine what it's like to live like that, knowing there are a lot of people walking the streets who would happy to stick a knife in you, to blow up your wife and kids. She was peeking out of an upstairs window, telling me she could see one of these men on the phone, that our house phone was ringing downstairs and she was freaking out, with 3 children in the house and me miles away. She hit the panic button, exactly as I said. Most people obviously wouldn't have a panic button in their home, but neither would most people have 6 different Osman warnings, specific and credible death threats uncovered by the police or security services. Luckily, this was just an unfortunate choice of location by 2 blokes to hand over their van that one was buying from the other. I say luckily because the panic button or not, it took the police 27 minutes to respond to the alarm. There have been major military battles that have been over and done within less time. Later I rang Dev, Edders and Afzal. It seemed things had gone well at their meeting. Afzal said they're fine Englishmen, just like the men I met in the military. Dev reported that Afzal spoke about himself a lot, and Edders was pretty much wondering the same as me. Is Afzal just being a politician, or is he really on the case? Is this actually someone on the inside who sees the light, who wants to do the right thing? We were hopeful. What was strange was that they then had another meeting with the EDL, and Afzal turned up with some blokes who were recognised as former members of the Birmingham City football hooligan gang, the Zulus, except these blokes were all Muslim converts. I had no idea at that time what that was all about. Afzal rang me the day before the EDL's Dudley demo in February and asked if I could go up there, but I couldn't. He went along to it, and when he phoned me he said I was treated very well. He seemed surprised. I told him that he would be, that it wasn't quite what he thought or what the media portrayed it as. Some 1,000 or so EDL supporters demonstrated, and it went off peacefully. Not that that's what you would have read in the papers. The headlines were all about 30 people being arrested, but what the police didn't say is that they were all Muslims, or Unite Against Fascism members, the left-wing rabble-rousers who followed us everywhere. There were no EDL arrests, but by the time the police came out and confirmed that, it was too late. They'd already run the headlines as usual. After that, Afzal contacted me in the first week in March, with the general election getting closer, and asked if I was looking for work. I told him I'm unemployable, pal. He didn't elaborate, didn't suggest anything dodgy. He just said that he had a way of me to earn some money. He was chasing after the Dudley North seat, held by the Labour MP Ian Austin, and an area with a big mix of Muslims, non-Muslims electorate, and the Tories thought it was right for Afzal to win. I left it at that, however. I didn't ring him back. Then he phoned on my daughter's 4th birthday, and my dad's 68th birthday the same day, Sunday, March the 9th. We were having a family meal at TGI Fridays in Milton Keynes, but he asked if he could come and see me. He seemed pretty desperate to talk, so I agreed. The first time I'd seen him, he turned up in a black Mercedes. This time he was driving a big cream Jeep, about 60 or 70 grand's worth of motor, except he had also this big fat Pakistani bloke with him. I thought, bugger me, he's his chauffeur. Not the fat bloke, but Afzal. He was driving this money man around, it appeared. We went into the Harvester in Milton Keynes, and this character with Afzal, named Naeem, was talking about all of his businesses, all the staff he has, all of his money. They asked if I minded going into a different restaurant in Luton. I told them I'm not exactly Mr. Popular in that part of the town, but Naeem said, "When you're with me, no one will say a word." I'm not being funny, but this tub of blood couldn't protect himself, let alone me. If he could ensure my safety, that would be down to who he was and how well known. I got the message loud and clear, as was clearly intended.